Hello and welcome to today's episode of Inside Workplace Wellbeing. I'm Nicole Dinan, Australia's leading corporate nutrition expert and gut health dietitian. Our podcast guest today is Tony Keusgen, Managing Director, Australia and New Zealand at Snap Inc. Tony shares insights into how Snapchat are meeting the challenge of supporting employee health head-on. They are not only working to support the physical well-being of their staff, but their mental well-being too. Through innovative solutions, including those focused on nutrition, I know you'll be keen to learn more about. Tony tells us how Snap's unique approach to building a sense of community across different areas of the business has been key in helping to bring staff back into the office. He shares not only his experience within the organisation, but how he manages his own well-being on a personal level. Let's dive into today's episode, brought to you by the Good Nutrition Co. Welcome to the Inside Workplace Wellbeing podcast, Tony. We're so excited to have you here today.
Hi, Nick. So good to see you, and thanks so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. We'd love to get to know a little bit more about you and learn more about Snapchat as a business, obviously. So can you start by telling us a bit about yourself and your role at Snap?
Sure. So I've been at Snap now for right on 9 months. It's gone super quickly. It's certainly a very different company and position than I was used to. I spent 13 years at Google across Australia, across New Zealand, and then Indonesia, and then looking after APAC back here in Sydney, and then worked in a artificial intelligence, advanced analytics business for some time, and then spent some time working as a chef in a restaurant in Sydney before coming to Snap.
Wow.
And so it's been a really interesting journey into the business, but the learnings in terms of Snapchat as an operation and as a platform, it's very different from other tech businesses, and that's what drew me to it. Right?
Yeah.
It's super exciting. So my role here is to look after the business operations across Australia and New Zealand. We've got a diverse range of teams. Here we've got teams in across the business development, account management, specialty areas such as marketing science, product management. We have creative strategy teams. We have engineering, trust and safety, and so forth. So we've got a wide range of different functions here in the office.
Yeah, sounds really diverse. And I guess, from our perspective in the whole workplace wellbeing side of things, like I can imagine that would be a challenge to be trying to look after everyone's, wellbeing as part of that. So how does workplace wellbeing really impact your success as a managing director?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, on your first comment, Nicole, I mean, we have a very diverse group of people here. I mean, one of the things I love at Snap actually is listening to all the different accents, in the office. It's really exciting when you kind of go to the kitchen and you hear so many people from different backgrounds in the business, and it reflects our community outside of the office as well, which is wonderful. And that also brings different challenges in terms of people's expectations around wellness. Their backgrounds, their beliefs, their passions, and their norms. It's shaped differently for each one of us, and so for a business to make sure we provide those needs wherever possible to bring the best out of our people, so they can bring the best of them to the business is a challenge, but an important one. And then, in terms of how that then impacts the success, for the business more broadly and for myself. Number one is, when people are showing up happier, with a higher level of well-being, be that physical well-being from their levels of health or their mental health, that impacts their productivity. There's no doubt about that.
So I've read a little bit about your concept of the council, Tony. So can you tell us how this initiative works at Snap and how it fits in with, the organisational values?
Yeah. Well, council's a really unique component of Snap's culture. And it began actually when the business was founded, around 13 years ago or so. And our founder, Evan Spiegel, who's also our CEO now, implemented this in the business, whereby the teams would come together in a small, intimate group, and one person would kind of facilitate an open, sharing, empathy session where teams could speak in a trusted environment and share whatever they needed to with their colleagues in a really a session focused on listening, trusting, and understanding. And it really underpinned the building of a level of trust and understanding of one another across different, particularly around different functions. You think in a business, oftentimes individuals may not have a lot to do with people working in the same office, given that they work in differing functions. But council would bring together people right across the different functions to be able to share about themselves, how they're showing up, how they're feeling about themselves, their role, their business, and it really reflects Snap's culture of smart, kind, and creative.
Yeah.
So it really does set an underpinning level of empathy and understanding of others.
Yeah, I really love that concept. And I think, our listeners who are mostly HR managers, people and culture, wellness leads, that sort of thing, I think they'd really love that idea and that concept, particularly around the cross-functional engagement between teams. And do you find that it does build more understanding and a sense of community within the organisation?
Yeah, it certainly does. And I've been in the business 9 months. I've done a few now, and they're really powerful. And what we've done in the business now is we bring in, I guess you'd call them independent facilitators. So
Right.
it's not one of your peers who's facilitating the session. It's actually, someone whose job it is to actually, we have people whose job it is to facilitate
Right.
councils. And so they also bring this level of independence. But there's so much about one another that we really don't know and understand, even though we might see one another in the workplace every day. And so it really does help kind of unshackle those barriers that sit between people that aren't necessarily placed there deliberately, but it really does help open up a deep level of understanding across the business.
Yeah, I really do. I love the concept, and I love the idea of the facilitator as well. So it really does give everyone that opportunity to talk. And do you find that it helps bring people back into the organisation?
Yeah, look, I think people, when they know there's a council that's happening, a lot of the feedback we get from our all ears surveys we do, I mentioned twice a year, is that it's important to people and they'd like to see more of them. So it's certainly when we put one on the calendar, we know that people are really keen to come and participate.
Excellent. And what about, nutrition, policies specific to food and nutrition? Do you have anything, related to that, or how does this whole concept of community play out in terms of food within the organisation?
Yeah, well, I mean, top of mind right now for most business leaders is this concept around return to office,
Yeah.
or just managing, people's balance between time in the office and time working remotely. And so, for us, one of the big kind of motivators, because you can deal with it through policy, or you can also deal with it through means by which you want to encourage people to come together. And I'm a big believer in that. So. As we've encouraged people to return to office and come back more regularly, we've put on lunch for all of our teams. Obviously, we have food throughout the day in our office, and mostly healthy snacks, Nick. Not all, but we've moved from the chips to the popcorn,
Yeah.
and we continue to what we optimize
Yeah.
for health. But in all seriousness, the food we put on for lunch creates an important moment in the day for all the teams. So we have one big, long wooden table that goes right through the kitchen. And when lunch comes, it comes at about midday, or it's served at midday. And at about 11:50, we have a lot of the teams already kind of milling around. They know the menu. The menu gets sent out to everybody sort of at 11 o'clock, so people know what's coming. And then it's this great moment of community where that big long table is full. The room is noisy with people interacting. And so it brings a really nice cultural moment for the teams to meal together, to connect around food.
Yeah.
Then the food itself, we constantly get feedback, and we're really lucky to have a great facilities team here who are constantly asking for feedback. So teams are surveyed consistently, and since we've brought the food in on a daily basis, the feedback we've managed to optimize based on that. So people, for example, have given the feedback that they don't necessarily want a Christmas lunch every day.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
So,
Good to
people
hear.
say, I don't want to be falling asleep at my desk when I get back because
Yep.
I've had this, this big roast with gravy and potatoes and all that sort of stuff. And so one of the things we've done is we're bringing, a salad bar. So we have a whole salad bar that's on every day that's pretty much the same, and we change up the proteins that go with that salad bar. So people can sort of interchange a little bit of the bigger cooked food. So we might have Mexican day, or we might have Japanese as a super exciting day. So Japanese is now a staple once a week that comes in.
Popular one.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've really listened to the teams around what they want, and generally, it's not what they want is more fancy. They actually want just more of a balance, so they can choose in terms of what goes on their plate is the right balance for them. So we make that available. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. So that's so great. And I do love the whole idea of connecting through food that you talked about, and that communal table. Like, that really does give me Blue Zone vibes. And, maybe for our listeners who haven't heard of that concept before, the Blue Zones are the people in the world who live the longest. And one of the things they have in common is not necessarily exactly what they eat. It's not exactly the same across all these diverse regions of the world, 5 different areas, but it's actually that sense of community and coming together. So I really love that concept of the communal table and, bringing everyone together through food. And the other thing that you mentioned there was the seeking of feedback around actually what's provided. It sounds like what's happening at Snap is a really strong culture of listening and taking on that feedback and really responding to the needs that your staff have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting about the Blue Zone, Nick. And I'd be keen to hear from you in terms of what you're seeing in other businesses in terms of how they optimize that food experience on both the types of food, but also the creating that sense of community.
Yeah, and I think, from what I've seen in other organisations, I haven't actually seen the communal table piece. So I think that is something, maybe some of our listeners will be interested in. But I've seen people, coming together, but typically they will sit, with their colleagues or their, friends from their own part of the business. So I think the communal table is nice in that it probably brings different areas of the business together. And it's a sort of set time by the sounds of it where everyone comes together at that same time. Whereas other businesses, I've seen them bring food in for sure. I'm not sure how related that is to feedback from staff. I'm sure sometimes it is. So I think that's really important. And also your comment on the Christmas lunch, it doesn't need to be like Christmas lunch every day. It doesn't need to be a huge meal, but something light and healthy that's going to, fuel people for the afternoon, but not make them fall asleep and then be reaching for the chocolate bar to deal with the 3 p.m. slump.
Yeah. And it's interesting, having worked in other businesses that also provide, food for employees at lunchtime. The big change I've seen at Snap has been the fact that actually nobody takes their food back to their desk. Not one person. And maybe that's part of due to how that office area is constructed, but I think it's much more down to the culture and facilitating people getting together. Whereas, oftentimes you do see people just one-on-one taking the food and going and sitting back at their desk, and that limits interaction altogether.
Yeah, 100%. And, there's so much about connection in terms of eating with other people, right? Rather than eating in front of a screen. So, yeah, awesome. It sounds like that's something that's really working well for the organisation. Yeah. So in terms of return to office, because I know this is a big thing for lots of organisations at the moment, are there any other initiatives that you've been implementing that are helping people feel like they want to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that we do, and you'd be surprised at some of the small things that have big impacts. And like, this is not reinventing the wheel, but we have that big open space where we have that communal table, and very early on, I asked facilities if they put in, some gaming options. So there's a table tennis table now that's there, and you'd be surprised how much time that gets.
Yeah.
Where teams get together and they use it. We have an outdoor balcony that teams often will use at the end of the week to sit down and reflect outside and look over the city and talk about the week that was.
Yeah.
That brings people together very strongly. We also encourage some volunteering for our teams, where we enable teams to have a certain amount of time each quarter to be able to give of themselves, their time, back to organisations that need our support. So, for example, I think last month was Oz Harvest, where the teams went out as a group from the office out to Oz Harvest and donated their time to assist with, arranging the supply of food for people in need. And so people come together as a group, and then they're able to give of themselves as a group and feel good about it, right? And facilitate that time. So that's a real plus.
Yeah, that's a powerful reason, I guess, to come back in as well. People want to be involved in those kind of initiatives. So that's fantastic. I'm not sure if you're aware, but here at the Good Nutrition Co, we have a different theme every month. And the theme for March, when your podcast is going to land, is actually intermittent fasting and the science of hangry. So I just wanted to get your opinion. I know it's not probably scientific opinion or anything like that, but certainly you're interested in your opinion on any experience you've had with fasting, if you've seen it happening in the organisation, and is that why people are lining up early for lunch every day?
Well, you've struck on a pretty raw nerve with me there, Paul. So yes, I do have some experience with intermittent fasting. It is a standard part of my day right now. So what are we? We're coming up to 10 a.m. And my last meal was 6:30 p.m. last night, and my next meal will be at lunch, and that's now my standard. But in terms of my experience, I did do quite a long stint following a program called OMAD, which is one meal a day. And yeah, that was a very interesting time, and I had some interesting insights through that.
Right. Would you care to share those with us? Maybe what the hardest part was of doing OMAD?
Well, firstly, it was sort of, I came about learning about OMAD just from, I was on a trip away, and a couple of the people on that trip were already well into it. And they seemed to be relatively well-informed individuals, and also quite fit and healthy individuals. So I thought about it, thought, I'll give this a crack.
Give it a go.
Yeah. And for me, the big part of one meal a day was just mind over matter, like putting this concept of feeling like, I'm waiting to eat, and then, finally it comes, just putting that out of your mind. I felt like it was kind of like running a marathon, right? I'm just going to run and not stop, and then I'll get to the end.
Yeah.
And so I'd say the first couple of days, it was interesting because, particularly about 3:00 in the afternoon, it was challenging, and hangry probably came.
The hanger came in.
It raised its head.
The hungry anger, yes.
That's right. But then, it was a great sense of, I guess, satisfaction when, you would eat. And I would generally eat very clean food at the end of the day. I wouldn't sort of gorge myself on, carbonara or something like that at the end of the day. I try and eat quite lean and healthy. But then,
what was your favourite meal, just to get that from you at that point?
Well, I love this. I came up with this salad years ago, which is, unfortunately being called TK salad, which happens to be initials. But it's a salad just full of raw vegetables, right? So raw cabbage, raw corn, raw rocket. Then there's some olives and carrot and a little bit of feta and fresh chili and lime zest and lime juice and a bit of olive oil. That's it. And
We'll
I
have
love
that recipe, please.
yeah. Yep. Please steal with pride, Nick.
Yes.
But it's I feel great after that. I might put a tin of
Mhm.
tuna in there or
Mhm.
whatever. But yeah, that's a great sense of cleanliness for me. You
Mhm.
not to eat all day and then eat something really clean like
Mhm.
that. I felt great, and I think I did OMAD for 5 months or so,
Mhm.
uh, reasonably strictly,
Mhm.
and I really enjoyed it.
Right.
But I think I learned, I wasn't sure if I was getting everything I needed on my plate, Nick.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that. Do you think you might have been meeting all of your dietary requirements? I guess it's probably quite challenging in one meal.
Well, you're the expert around that. So
We could document it all and work out how much fiber, protein, and all the macro and micronutrients you were getting out of that meal. But typically, I think, just generally speaking, it would be quite challenging to get all your nutrient requirements in one meal, which is possibly why you've moved to now having a lunch meal as well. Is that right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic maths that I did, and again, I'm not as sophisticated as you around biomes and all of those important factors. But for me, it became clear that when I discovered you needed about 1 milligram of protein per day per
Mm-hmm.
kilogram of body weight,
Mm-hmm.
um, then when I did my numbers, it's like you can't eat. So let's say I weigh 74 kilos.
Yeah.
I can't eat 74 grams of protein in one meal. Like
Yeah.
it's actually
Yeah.
almost impossible to do that.
Mm-mm.
And then if you did, I don't think you'd feel particularly great.
No, I
So
don't think you feel particularly great
yeah,
either. Yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
if that's actually a factual requirement, and again,
Mm.
I'd love your insight on that. But if it
Mhm.
is, then um, OMAD doesn't satisfy that requirement.
Mm.
And so, yeah, for me now, going back to 2 meals a day, I think it's a lot easier to satisfy that requirement, and
Yeah.
it's more of a sustainable approach in terms of
Yeah. Long
how you
term.
do it.
Yeah. And I guess it allows you to partake in that whole experience at lunchtime as well with the teams. But yeah, from a scientific point of view, the protein requirement is one thing. So 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per day for most people. So yes, that part's hard, but all the fiber and all the other nutrients. And I guess when it comes down to the research on intermittent fasting, OMAD, or 1 meal a day, is probably the type of fasting that's had the least research around it, and possibly because it's quite hard to encourage people to partake in a trial, surviving on 1 meal a day, whereas there seems to be more evidence growing around protocols like the 16-8 diet, where you eat within an 8-hour window. So it's what we refer to as time restricted eating. So you shorten the number of hours within which you eat. So 8 hours is what you would be eating within. So this is probably more like what you're doing now. And then you have an extended 16-hour fast. And some of the research around that suggests that it can assist some people with weight management. They found that it's not necessarily better than a restricted calorie diet, but it can be easier to achieve for a lot of people because then they don't have to think about as much what they're eating in that eating window. Of course, we want it to be healthy, but it's not like that feeling of restriction in terms of I'm cutting out things that I enjoy, because people tend to still eat those. So similar evidence around weight management, but where I think a lot of people enjoy fasting is around the autophagy, or the cellular cleanup benefits that they
Mm,
feel they experience. And early evidence is showing that could be beneficial, for blood sugar control, inflammation in the body, even some neurological benefits. So we just need more research essentially around it. But I, for one, am happy that you kind of have extended your eating regime to more of a 16-8 rather than the OMAD.
So, Nicole, does this mean that the old adage of the breakfast is the most important meal of the day, is that now seriously under threat in your world? How's that all being digested?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I love the digestion pun. I think it really comes down to the individual. So, me personally, try and get me to fast, and yes, you'll be trying really hard. Breakfast is my favorite meal of the day. But I think, when people get into the routine of fasting, like you found initially with doing OMAD, the first few days were the hardest because your body gets used to a particular way of eating, and it's like sleep. It gets used to going to bed at a certain hour, waking up at a certain hour. It's kind of like that with your eating routine as well. So, um, you know, for me to skip breakfast, like that's part of my routine. So it's really challenging for me to do that. Whereas for you, you've kind of trained your body. And so you're used to now not having breakfast. So the body kind of adapts to that. So I think it all comes down to this personalized nutrition, and there's not one size fits all at the end of the day. And certainly in our business, we just work with the individual to try and make it as, relevant to them and as healthful for them in the way that they'd like to eat.
Got it.
Yeah. All right. I'm really conscious of time. I know you've got a hard finish. So I wanted to switch back now, if it's okay, just to talking about how you measure the effectiveness of the wellbeing initiatives and your wellbeing policies within the organisation.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think for some businesses, this can be opaque. But certainly for me, one of the kind of premises behind building any sort of wellbeing program in a business is it needs to be tied to business outcomes. And I don't think we need to shy away from that.
Mm.
Like, ultimately, why do you want well-being? Is because you want your business to perform at its optimum, and that means your people are performing at their optimum. And so, one of the key measures of a well-being program is actually how well your business is performing,
Mm.
because that's surely the outcome that you're wanting
Yeah.
to drive, right? And then obviously it goes deeper than that. Obviously, you need to figure out, okay, so what are the pillars of performance that we want to focus on from our wellbeing program? And I mentioned before, our All Ears survey where people provide clear
Mm-hmm.
feedback around
Yeah.
how they're showing up. But you want to figure out if part of your program is focused on bringing people back to the office, then that's an easy metric
Yeah.
to go measure. And then, for me, for example, one of those softer measures is how many people are sitting at that table at lunchtime,
Mm.
right? It's a really great measure to say, okay, it's Thursday afternoon, it's 12:45, and we've got 70% of our office sitting together in the office
Mhm.
having lunch. That is for me a tick, right?
Yeah.
But if I was looking at the same time next Thursday and there are only 7 people there, then we need to look at what's happening with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. Beyond the individual, it does come down to the business bottom line. So, final question in the essence of time is, have you got one top tip or piece of advice for HR managers or workplace wellness leads who are tuning in today, in relation to how they can make their workplace wellness program more effective in their organisation or build their culture, more thoroughly?
Yeah. I would say start with one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Data beats opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So listen first, figure out what are the real needs from teams in your environment. Every business is different. Every business has got different resources it can provide to its. Not every business can provide a delicious lunch every single day on it. Everyone has different constraints within them. But
Mm-hmm.
the most important factor is to think, what am I learning from my teams and groups around me in terms of what would be the most impactful pillars to build a wellness program around?
Mm-hmm.
And starting with the right data rather than starting with your own kind of, oh, I've been on this seminar and everyone says you have to bring food in. That's not always the answer. It's just
Yeah.
one. So rather than coming with your own kind of ideas, the best programs are built on data and feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and then tying what your wellness program will do to business outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's this going to do for our people? And then for what is that going to do in terms of helping our people be more productive and
Mm-hmm.
happier, more engaged, more collaborative in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace?
Mm-hmm.
And based on those two foundations, then you'll have an evidence-based program that will help optimize business and people performance.
Amazing. I think that's a great note to finish on. And I really wanted to thank you for all of your insights. I just think it sounds like Snap are really leading the way in a lot of this whole community-based return to work. A lot of the policies that you're implementing are really focusing on the well-being of your people, but beyond that, they're actually focused on improving productivity and business outcomes as well. So thanks a million for joining us today, Tony. I really have enjoyed our chat, and I'm sure our listeners have got a lot out of it too.
Well, thanks for having me, Nicole. I've loved our conversation and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Yes, love to have you back.
Right. All the best.
Bye. So that's it for today's episode. My biggest takeaway from the conversation with Tony was to authentically live and breathe the culture in your organisation, something it seems Snapchat are doing in spades. I also loved hearing Tony's take on the importance of listening to your people to seek first to understand what they need and then build a strong wellness plan around that. Snap have found that this helps in a positive way to get everyone on board and working productively together towards linked business outcomes. We'd love to know what resonated with you too. So go on Instagram and DM us at The Good Nutrition Co. or connect with us via LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you liked today's episode, make sure you leave us a review and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on future episodes. Thanks for joining me today. Stay well. Bye for now. Today's episode is brought to you by The Good Nutrition Co., Australia's leading corporate nutrition partner. The Good Nutrition Co. has helped support the health and wellbeing of over 35,000 employees around Australia with exclusive masterclasses and on-demand learning, on-site workshops and one-on-one dietitian support. Head to goodnutritionco.com to find out how we can help you build a culture of health, wellness and productivity in the workplace today.